Okay, I see that it is 3:30, so we'll get started. We're just trying to get one of our co-hosts hooked up with the audio here. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited to have you all for this conversation about the whole process of becoming a lawyer and what law school is like. First of all, congratulations to everyone who just graduated. I know we have a lot of recent grads, whether it's from high school, an undergrad degree, any other type of degree, law school. It's a huge accomplishment wherever you're coming from. I know that ceremonies aren't really the same these days as they usually are, but try to enjoy the accomplishment and try to enjoy this summer and the feeling of the period between achieving your last goal and venturing into your next. It's a really exciting time. Before we get started, I want to let you all know that this session will be recorded and it'll be posted online on our website just in case anybody needs to loop back or there's something that you think that you missed. In this conversation, we're looking to run through topics that we think are going to be of interest to all of you, hopefully. So we're looking to cover choosing undergraduate classes to prepare for law school, choosing the law school that you want to go to and courses there, the LSAT, the NCAs for those of you who are thinking about going to law school abroad, the process of the bar exam, of articling, and then also the practice of law and sort of what that's like to see if that's something that you might be interested in. At the end of each topic, we'll open it up for questions. I think that probably the least chaotic way to do that would be for each of you to type your questions in the chat, and then we can go through them and answer your questions. But if you want to, you can also just unmute your microphone and then feel free to ask a question during that period as well. We do ask that you keep the microphones muted throughout the presentation just so that we can avoid the background noise and any unfortunate bathroom incidents, which seem to be really common these days. But if you do have a question, then feel free to unmute yourself and pop in there. So I think we should start out with introductions. I'm Jacqueline Tuckey. I'm a first-year associate. I'm practicing in civil litigation, employment law, and municipal law. I summered at Barriston. I was here from the summer after 1L, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with law school is the first year. It goes 1L, 2L, 3L. I started the summer after 1L here. I came back the summer after 2L. And then I articled once I graduated and just recently started as an associate. So it's been really exciting and I've kind of followed through the whole part of the process in Barrie at Barriston, which has been great. I did my undergraduate degree in environmental studies at the University of Toronto. I minored in French and Spanish, and then I went to Osgoode Hall for law school. I was really happy with both education, so happy to answer any questions to do with those. I had an environmental focus all throughout undergrad and then throughout law school as well, and that's not at all where I ended up. So we'll talk a little bit about that later and how much of an open mind you should keep going through the whole process. And I'll pass it on to Christine to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name's Christine Nickel. I'm a third-year associate here at Barriston. I did my undergrad in Ottawa at Carleton University, and I actually majored in law there, as we'll get more into detail, but Carleton does have a designated undergrad law program. Currently, I'm practicing in the solicitor areas of law, so real estate, wills and estates, and corporate law here at Barriston. And yeah, we'll get more into the undergrad side of things as we progress.
Okay, Cassandra,
Alex?
I don't know if Cassandra's audio is working yet, so Alex, go ahead.
Sure. So I'm Alex, and I actually just finished my first year of law school. I'm going to school at the Schulich School of Law, which is Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. I'm just finished my first year, so I'm entering my second year. I'm here at Barriston working for the summer, and I'm still sort of on the fence as to where I'm exactly going. So to echo what Jacqueline was saying earlier, I'm trying to just sort of keep as open of a mind as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Cassandra, we still can't hear you. Oh,
you can't hear me?
We can now. Go ahead.
Oh,
Perfect.
Look at that. It's nice when technology works, eh? Hey guys, my name's Cassandra Ironside. I did my undergrad at Guelph in commerce. I majored in economics. I took 4 or 5 years off after high school. Went and did that, and I took 2 years off and did law school in Australia, actually. So anybody looking forward to maybe potentially going overseas, Christine and I both have that experience. So we'll get into that should that be of any interest.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Let's start with choosing undergraduate classes and what kinds of things we all lean towards, knowing that we were going to law school, or if anybody didn't know that that was the goal. Alex, you were most recent to do this. Did you want to get started?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I completely forgot when I was introducing myself. I forgot to say where I went to do my undergraduate. I went to Laurentian University in Sudbury, and I did commerce. I actually started in political science, but I switched to commerce. I didn't specialize because I know that's a fairly common thing for a lot of commerce programs nowadays. I didn't specialize, not really particularly by choice, but I had some circumstances that kind of prevented me from being able to do it. But the bulk of my courses ended up focusing on finance, so that's sort of my background.
Okay, perfect. And did you choose any courses with the goal of going to law school, or you're kind of focusing on what's interesting to you?
I didn't really, because for the bulk of my undergraduate years, actually, quite frankly, I didn't really know what I was going to do. Law was kind of on my mind, but I didn't really pick my courses thinking about law, to be completely honest. My perspective was I wanted to pick courses that I was interested in and that consequently I would perform well in, because that's a big part of, applications for law school and stuff like that. So that was kind of my focus when I was doing my undergraduate years.
Perfect. Thank you. Christine, any input?
Yes, definitely. So as I mentioned, I went to Carleton University in Ottawa for my undergrad degree and master's. And law was kind of always on the forefront of my mind. Unfortunately, the high school I went to didn't have any kind of law classes. They did eventually get some. So in my first year at university was kind of the first time I was exposed to a law class, which was sort of the general intro to laws. And from there, I just continued adding more and more, law classes to my undergrad schedule over the 4 years, and kind of took a variety of legal law courses in my undergrad. I also wanted to have some variety, so I did take, of course, some sociology, biology, psychology as well, and poli-sci, like Alex mentioned, just to get, a bit of variety. But my major was obviously in law, which is a nice feature that Carleton has. So I think most, universities for undergrad do have criminology and things that are somewhat legal based, but what drew me to Carleton was their actual undergraduate law program there. And I definitely had some really great professors. Some were judges and lawyers. So that was kind of an interesting, take to get some sort of real life practical professors in there as well. I found a lot of the undergrad legal courses to be heavily focused on case law, which sort of set a great foundation for going into law school. And like I said, Cassandra mentioned, I went to the United Kingdom for law school in London, England. And I noticed there that a lot of the case law that I covered in my undergrad law program at Carleton was also, then covered in the UK law school. So there was quite a bit of overlap, which was nice. And again, during my undergrad, I volunteered at a local law firm in Ottawa and was able to kind of gain a little bit of experience. So I wasn't really officially a summer student, and obviously I wasn't in law school at the time, but they still did let me do some volunteer work at the law firm during my undergrad as well. And yeah, it was really great just learning, how to read case law and, having that sort of advantage on a lot of people who might not have studied law in their undergrad and might have taken, economics or music or anything like that, because really you can choose any sort of undergrad course that you want and still apply to law school. But it is really nice to have some kind of a legal basis, whether it's criminology or business courses. So that's kind of my experience of undergrad.
Absolutely. And that's one of my favorite things about this career path is I find that you can kind of study whatever really interests you in undergrad. You don't really have to gear it towards law. And then that can often sometimes guide you in the direction that you're going to go. And I never felt disadvantaged by that, but I think from listening to what you've said, you definitely had a nice advantage having that exposure beforehand.
Yes,
I'm my friend back here. We've got our windows being washed, I think. So sorry for that distraction. Cassandra, did you want to talk about your experience in choosing undergrad courses?
Sure. So for me, it was not on my radar at all. As I had mentioned, I'd taken 4 or 5 years off after high school, and I was out west snowboarding. So a little bit of a different venture there, good life adventure, but I can't say it contributed much to my legal knowledge. But I did take law in high school. In my undergrad at Guelph, I did take business law. So that would be my only comparison. I'm not quite sure whether or not you guys had a bookkeeping class at your law school. We did. I thought it was quite relevant. I mean, after taking accounting and finance and things like that. So I can't say that my undergrad was directed towards law at all. However, I have found that in practice, at the end of the day, it is a business as well. So I think keeping that in mind is also quite good, because you need to be fairly efficient with your time. So, and understanding docketing and things like that, and then your accounts and billings, I think that has definitely assisted me for sure. One of the things, I was speaking with Justin, he unfortunately wasn't able to join us, but he did mention he felt that I believe he took political science, and he felt that having the practice doing as much writing as he did, because I might have written one essay or two essays in my undergrad. So I was a little bit blindsided when I got to law school. I hadn't done research in years and years, and when I had, it was extremely irrelevant. So going back to basics, learning how to do citations and things like that was definitely a steep learning curve, to say the least.
And just to touch on that point too, I also did my master's at Carleton when I was kind of on the fence about whether I, take the plunge and go to law school or not. So I ended up just doing a 2-year master's program in legal studies at Carleton. And like Cassandra said, I think that was really beneficial and not a waste of time at all, as it really did teach you, how to write essays, citation, use, quick law, LexisNexis, which lawyers in our firm, currently are using. So I was exposed to that. And it just gave a different perspective on the law as well, as it was more legal theories, so not as much case law, obviously, and definitely taught good research skills. So, you can consider, doing a master's in there as well if you have the time and want to try that. So
that's a great background to have for sure. I know a lot of my colleagues in law school had science backgrounds, and quite a few of them said that they had a disadvantage and they had a really hard time because, like Cassandra said, they hadn't written any papers, and law school is very, it tends to be very focused on papers. You can kind of alter it and focus more on moots or on practical experience, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But you really can come from any background, and you've got people in your law school from every background, which is really nice. You're learning from people have different perspectives. It's a nice mix to have. I started out in poli-sci as well for my first year. I ended up taking an environmental class, and I really enjoyed it. And then I took some French and Spanish courses. I really enjoyed those as well. So I completely kind of did a 180 and changed what I was doing. And I ended up taking those throughout undergrad, thinking that I was going to be an environmental lawyer. I knew before going into my undergrad that I wanted to be a lawyer. So similar to what Alex said, I also knew that I had to kind of gravitate towards courses where I would succeed, because that's just kind of the nature of the beast, and you need high grades to get in. You need to be very well-rounded overall, but high grades are important, and so that definitely does play a factor. I think that law courses may be helpful in the ways that people have discussed already. It is kind of an entirely different thing when you come in and you're trying to read cases, or you're trying to use this legal research software and websites. It can be a little bit confusing. So if you do have a law course available to you, even if you are doing a completely different major and you just think you're interested, it might be a nice background to have, but I don't think it's necessary at all. So I think we'll open it up to questions if anybody wants to unmute their microphone and ask any questions about choosing undergraduate courses before we move on to the next topic.
Hello, my name's Tanishi. I'm currently starting my undergrad, so I'm very excited to go into my first year. And I've gotten a lot of different opinions about the types of courses and what you can do for your undergrad. because the biggest opinion that I hear is you can take any major, like I believe you guys touched on, and still be successful in law school. But at the same time, I've heard that professors will often recommend you take, for example, rhetoric courses, or certain courses that are more heavy on like improving your writing skills. But I didn't know if there are any specific courses that law schools will maybe prefer you take, or if there are any courses that might make law schools a little bit more likely to accept you.
Thanks for the question, Tanisha. It's a great question. It's really hard to say what law schools are looking at when they're conducting admissions. I think that it's a guessing game everyone's been trying to play, and some people say that some of them look more at an LSAT and they weigh the LSAT score higher than they weigh other factors. A lot of them look at the grades. There are, of course, a bunch of other factors. You've got your letters of recommendation and you've got your extracurricular activities, which I think are important as well. I can't speak for the law schools, but I've never heard that they value any particular courses over others. I think that when they're looking at grades, it's from my understanding, it's fairly mathematical, and they're looking at where you've succeeded and where you perhaps haven't succeeded as much. And I know some of them will look at all 4 years of grades. Some of them will look at your best 2. Some of them look at your most recent 2. Some people have theories that it looks good if you've improved over your last 2 years as compared to your first 2 years. It's really hard to say, and it really does depend where you're applying, but it's hard even to get an answer from the universities. So I would say my recommendation personally, and maybe other people here have other recommendations, but mine would be to try to strengthen yourself while also pursuing strong grades. So if you're not a strong writer right now, but you know you want to go to law school and you know that you'll need analytical skill or you'll need to be writing long papers, then maybe take a course that you think is going to help you with that. But I would also balance it with courses that are interesting to you and courses that you suit your strengths, so that you can show them that you've got those strengths and that you can succeed academically. I don't know if anybody has anything to add to that or counter it with.
No, I definitely agree with you in the sense that I don't think the law schools are looking for law classes necessarily. I think they just want someone, well-rounded, obviously with decent grades as well. So, I had a friend in law school and she majored in philosophy, and she actually said that kind of way of thinking really helped her with law school. And I never took any philosophy. So in my undergrad, for example, like I mentioned, I took poli-sci. I took some environmental courses as well, some business classes, and sociology. So yeah, it's just good to get exposed to a lot of different areas. And again, like Jacqueline mentioned, if you study environmental course, you may want to be an environmental lawyer. So depending what you take in your undergrad, it could lead you down a specific path in terms of your legal career as well. So it's good to keep your options open and just kind of, get exposed to as much as you can during your undergrad and learn as much as possible.
If I can add to that as well, as a mature student, if that's what you want to call it, after taking some time off, I think what I had observed from my peers is you're going quite young now. Some students are 17, likely 18. That part of your life is also a big area to grow in. So you also are going to need to learn how you study, like what your time management skills are, what your organizational skills are, which will carry you through that time and through law school as well. I think that part of it is very important, as well as which classes you pick. But I think learning what works for you, I know sometimes people had the group mentality, we get the answer together, but you need to be able to get there on your own. So I think that's quite important as well, to focus on that part of it, and your personal study skills and those habits that you need to create in order to be successful, aside from just picking the right courses.
Absolutely. Thanks again for the question, Tanisha. Did anybody have any other questions before we? Okay, so next I think maybe we'll talk about choosing law schools, which will be an interesting topic among us because we all went pretty different paths. So Cassandra, did you want to get us started?
Sure, I can start for sure. So I had taken 2 years off after my undergrad, and I was working at a law firm in Collingwood with no expectation previously to becoming a lawyer. So I was going there on the business side to run the law firm from that perspective. Lo and behold, I had found out that, hey, this might be an interesting thing for me here. And being an older person and really valuing life experiences, I had decided, and also previously going to Australia and seeing the campus, I decided that Bond University was going to be for me. There were quite a few people in the Collingwood area, Barrie area, that have gone to that university specifically. It is a private university. And what I really appreciated about the courses there was they were quite practical based. So I actually didn't write many papers at law school. It was more focused on moots, client negotiations. What else did we do? Interviews, actually drafting documents. So I really appreciated that, having come into my articles with, I felt, some valuable experience. I wanted to go to the beach more than the UK personally. I know Christine may have a different perspective than that, but I really appreciated the 2-year intensive program. I know there's definitely pros and cons between staying in Canada and going abroad. For me, it was the right choice, and I had a great time and had a great experience. So I don't know who wants to follow up on that.
I can follow up since we're kind of talking about the international law school right now. So, you know, I enjoy traveling in my spare time. I had been to London, England twice before I made the move to London for law school, and decided, you know, it would be sort of a challenge personally. I could, you know, gain a lot of independence going there, as in my undergrad I had a lot of friends from my hometown who went there, so just kind of wanted to branch out and get sort of exposed to different culture and gain more independence. So that was part of the reason why I decided to go to law school abroad. Also, as some of you may know, there is no LSAT required to apply to any UK law schools. So that takes a lot of the pressure off with respect to, you know, test taking if you're not the best at taking those kind of tests. So yeah, basically my time abroad, I went to Queen Mary, University of London, and that's pretty much right downtown in England there. What I really enjoyed actually about the classes were that each of our main courses had a tutorial. So I believe, you know, some of you maybe experienced tutorials before, so just smaller sort of classes with a tutor. And I did like this because, you know, if you had a question that you didn't want to ask in the main sort of lecture hall, you could, you know, address that in front of a small group of peers. And I happened to be with a lot of Canadian students. So there was maybe, I'd say about 30 Canadians actually in my year at Queen Mary Law School, which was nice. And I was hoping to meet a lot of British people, but I ended up hanging out with mostly Canadians, as it turned out. And who live 15 minutes from me back home in Canada, so we keep in touch. But yeah, the grading process is a bit different over there, so you kind of have to get used to that. Like a 70% is pretty much an amazing grade over there if you get a 70 or higher. And let's see what else is a little different. So we do have to take some European Union law classes. That was mandatory. So that was a little bit of a waste, but it was still really interesting. And I guess the main draw for going to the UK as opposed to Australia, etc., is England was kind of the foundation for the common law, which is what Canadian law is based on. So it was kind of neat to study, you know, in the history of it all, where it all began, and see some of the old courts, like the Old Bailey criminal court there, and also to go to the Supreme Court and tour around there. So it was just a really great, you know, overall experience. I was able to join the Pro Bono Society and do some volunteer work in London when I was there. And again, the difference there is if you did want to stay on and become a lawyer in the UK, you actually choose to be a barrister or a solicitor, whereas here in Canada, when you're called to the bar, you're called to be both a barrister and solicitor. So over there, there's different training and vacation schemes similar to articling, but just a little bit different process. But it was definitely a great experience, and I definitely do not regret any of it, and miss London a lot. So I'd highly recommend venturing out and going to an international law school if you can do it.
To add to what you're saying about the history and the foundation of the law in Canada, I found that going to law school in Canada, we spent probably the majority of our first year learning British law or English, yes, because it is so much of the history. And I would imagine that, Cassandra, you probably learned quite a bit of it as well. Mm-hmm. And even to this day, a lot of the precedent or the jurisprudence that we rely on dates back to British law. So I think a lot of people are a little bit hesitant sometimes. They're worried that they're going to be learning a law that's not applicable, but I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that the systems are still very similar, and the history is mostly the same. So I think that it's we're probably learning the same cases first year.
Exactly, I'm sure we were.
Sure.
It's overlap, and I recognized a lot of the case law from having my major in undergrad in law at Carleton, as I mentioned. So a lot of the case law was familiar. So I knew that going in as well, and I knew the conversion process to come back to practice as a lawyer after going to law school abroad was going to be somewhat easier because the common law in Canada is very, comparable and similar to that in the UK. So not a huge adjustment there. And just to touch on sort of the conversion process. So there's the National Center of Accreditation, or the NCA exams, which when I first decided to go to law school abroad, I had never heard of them before. I didn't know anyone personally who had gone abroad, so I just kind of went with the flow. And as it turned out, when I graduated law school, I had to come back home to Canada and write, I believe it was 7 open book pass or fail exams with the NCA committee. So, it does take a little bit more time, but I, again, did a 2-year condensed program abroad, which you can do if you have an undergrad degree. So instead of doing 3 years of law school, it was just 2. And then depending how quickly you write the NCA exams, you could be done in 3. So it ends up being about the same amount of time as going to a Canadian law school. And the NCA exams were fairly straightforward, open book, and different topics, which, some were, family, business, and things like that, sort of the main sort of areas of law foundations. And Cassandra, you actually more recently wrote the NCA exams, so you could probably speak to those a bit better than I could, but that's sort of the process when you come back.
Did you want to touch on that, Cassandra, and the whole
Sure.
that you've recently been through?
Yeah, for sure. So depending on where you go, I'm not sure why there's a preference, but from the school that I came from, we only had to write 5 of the exams. I do know some of the schools in the UK, I know some people that had to write up to 9 or 10. I think they can make you, I don't know if you know, Christine, off the top of your head, the maximum amount. I think it's 12.
I believe it is, or they can require you to take some law school courses even, and it really just depends on your grades abroad and what courses you took abroad. So they kind of assess you as to how many exams you're going to be required to take, but I believe 5 is the minimum.
Right, and those main courses are similar to the courses that you take for the bar exams. So it was almost a pre-prep, if that's what you want to call it. So that was a good overview for me personally.
Perfect. Okay, and Alex, you've got the perspective of someone who went to a Canadian law school, or who's attending a Canadian law school, but outside of the province of Ontario. What led to your choice of law school?
Yeah, so for me, I did my undergraduate here in Ontario in Sudbury. And when I was in my final year and decided I wanted to go into law school, I thought it would be kind of neat to try and get the perspective of living somewhere else, just sort of in Canada. So that had me looking at sort of the schools out of province. And that's sort of how, that was sort of one of the big things that helped me land in Dalhousie. And my first year there is pretty interesting because as has been echoed, we learn a lot of similar courses as even the international students do. And our course load was pretty broad in the sense that we covered a wide range of topics from criminal to property to tort. And then we actually also had a course on legal research and writing. But yeah, so I think my first year was very sort of help dip your toes in the water to get an idea of where you want to go. And I'm still sort of unsure of where I'm going to go to, but I'm keeping an open mind. But yeah, going back to how I ended up at Dalhousie, for me, it was mostly just, I kind of wanted that experience of living out of Ontario, just sort of going somewhere else in Canada and seeing what the sort of culture was like. I just happened to end up at Dalhousie because I had a lot of friends who went there and a lot of friends who had a lot of positive things to say about it. And yeah, that was kind of what helped me land out there, really.
That is a nice thing about undergrad or law degrees. It's nice when you've got the opportunity that you can go out somewhere and you can be kind of in the process of furthering your career while also exploring different parts of the world. I know all of you have kind of relocated. I didn't choose to relocate, but I did do a semester abroad, which I highly recommend to anybody who, you know, doesn't want to commit to living somewhere else entirely, but is excited about the idea of 3 or 4 months abroad. I was in the Netherlands, so if anybody has any questions about that, that was a really exciting time for me as well. And it was still, I mean, that law is not the same as our law here, but I still found that the concepts that I was learning over there ended up being very helpful to me here. So like I said, I went to Osgoode. I chose it for a number of reasons. And I think there are some main considerations you should make in choosing your law school. So like we've discussed, you know, if you want an adventure and you want to go somewhere else, that's a great reason. Why not? Timing as well, or whether or not you want to do the LSAT. If you're looking within Ontario, I think a lot of things that people look at are clinics available. So for those of you who aren't familiar, clinics are kind of like a co-op placement that you can do in law school. They're usually pretty limited, so not everybody has the opportunity. But if it's something that you're looking to get some hands-on experience with, then you might want to choose a school which has a lot of clinics. So Osgoode had, I think maybe at the time, 4 or 5 times as many clinics as a lot of the other schools I was considering. I'm not positive about that, but I know that they had quite a few clinical opportunities, and they were one of the few schools that had an environmental clinical, which is what I was interested in. You can also look at size. Osgoode is a comparatively big school, so our class size was 300. Most are 200 in Ontario. But Osgoode does a really good job of dividing us up. So we were divided into section A, B, C, and D for first year. And you took all your courses except for I think one with your section. So we became a really close-knit group. You do things together, you get to know each other, you kind of rely on each other. That was a really nice thing. Location, as we've discussed, is important. It was important for me to be close to home. So I was really happy being in Toronto. I commuted the whole time. I also commuted during most of my undergrad. And so if anyone's in the Barrie area or, you know, any area within about an hour and a half of their school, I'm happy to talk about the commute. It was doable, especially with the GO train. Price is also a really big consideration. Osgoode was at the time much more expensive than a lot of the other schools. So it was kind of a bit of a deterrent for me, but in the end it ended up being worth it. But there are schools that don't have quite the same price tag and you still get a great education. So I think that's something to keep in mind, as well as where you're hoping to work afterwards. So I heard from a lot of people, and I don't know if it's true or I don't know if it still applies, but while I was in law school, a lot of people thought a lot of the downtown Toronto firms, if you wanted to work there or article there, then you had to be at certain schools. And I think that oftentimes you can look up statistics and it'll show you how many of their students or their new associates were hired from school in Ontario or abroad. And so you can kind of gauge based on that if that is your final goal. If it's not your goal, then I think that oftentimes it's less important than people make it out to be. And, you know, every school that we've all attended, they've all given us great educations. I haven't heard a bad thing about an Ontario law education or any other law education for that matter. So I think, you know, if you keep the other considerations in mind, then you'll end up where you need to be. Okay, we've got a few questions about this. Again, feel free to unmute yourself if you wanted to ask a question live. We had one question about how many law schools we've applied to, how much our grades and LSAT score impacted the universities that accepted us or denied us. Some people are asking about what we did to make ourselves more well-rounded, or how we went about getting nice, strong letters of recommendation. So I don't know if anybody has something that they wanted to jump in with about that.
My experience was a little bit different. So applying to law schools abroad, I applied to 5 schools in the UK, and I kind of just selected which I got into all of them, which was a nice option to have some variety to pick from. And I ended up going with Queen Mary, just especially given the location of the school and its reputation and some of the students the school has had over the years. You know, it was right downtown in London, and I figured if I was going over there, I wanted to be right in the heart of the city. In terms of getting strong recommendations, it might be a little harder these days if you're doing, you know, online classes and not able to connect or talk with your professors, you know, after class or before. But I was a teaching assistant during my master's, so a TA, and I was able to get a good letter of recommendation there. And again, I can't speak for the law school, so I'm not sure how heavily they look at those letters of recommendation versus your grades or volunteering. But I also did, you know, do some volunteering at the law firm, like I mentioned, in my undergrad, a local law firm in Ottawa. So they also provided a letter of recommendation. But that's, yeah, kind of my experience on it.
Cassandra, any input?
I think, as we all know, you know, law, we're in the business of relationships, and that's quite important. I know we are all, you know, you just get hammered by talking about networking. Hindsight's 2020. You really need to become comfortable with the uncomfortable and putting yourself out there in those situations that you may not feel necessarily comfortable, or going to those events. I know our school was great with putting on those types of events, networking events, things like that. I imagine that Jacqueline and Alex and Christine had similar experiences. So just being personable, putting yourself out there, and recognizing that it is quite an important part of this business, and getting clients and things like that once you are admitted, and practicing. We are in the relationships game, so building those types of relationships are quite important.
I did quite a bit of research with regard to all of this in the time leading up to applying for law school, and then in the time waiting for the results of those applications. And first of all, I should mention while I'm thinking of it, there's a website. I think I would just Google law school forums. And there was a website where all law students and prospective law students and a bunch of lawyers sign on, and they talk about anything really. There were tons of questions about the LSAT. There were all these questions that you're all asking. You know, people have been asking these forever. They're really, you know, it's kind of a standard. It's things that people are constantly thinking about. So I would encourage you to check out that website. I can't say that any of it is going to be accurate. There's a lot of speculation, but people hear different things from different schools, or they just advise about their experience and, you know, the statistics that they had when they got into this university or that university. And I found it very helpful to look through and find different responses to questions like these. So some people in those forums had discussed letters of recommendation, and there were different takes. Some people thought that it was important to have letters of recommendation from people in the industry. So I personally had one from someone in the legal industry as well as from a professor. Some people say it doesn't matter so much who it comes from as long as it's strong. So if you had a really good relationship with the boss once, and you think that they'll write you a really, really personable letter that really shows your personality and your work ethic and your intelligence, then some people say that that is a lot more important than, you know, a good name on the paper. I think it's definitely important to make sure that you get to know whoever you're asking for your letters of recommendation. So if you are in 3rd or 4th year, getting to know your professors, maybe taking a smaller course, usually they are smaller at that point, being really active, sitting near the front, talking to your professor, participating, making sure they know who you are, so that at the end of the semester when you approach them and you ask for a letter of recommendation, they have something to say. I find a lot of the time they'll ask you to draft something, and then they'll kind of adjust it and see what they agree and disagree with. That's a tough thing. It's a really hard thing to write, this is what's great about me, and then have someone, you know, maybe take stuff out. But it's part of the process, and I think it'll probably happen in other areas of your life as well. So I would recommend maybe starting with a draft of that as well, because you aren't trying to make their life any harder in writing this letter. I worked to become more well-rounded, so I know they like volunteering and they like you being involved in your undergrad schools oftentimes. So I volunteered at a wildlife sanctuary. I volunteered teaching a fitness class to elders. I did note taking at the university. I got involved however I could in my undergraduate school. They like to see that. They like to see that you're going to be part of the community. Again, I think because of what Cassandra was saying about, looking for personable people who are going to be able to have strong relationships with others. So I think that those things are probably important, just getting to know people. Alex, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, actually, I do have one thing to add. When I was applying for school, I found that all my applications, one thing that was requested specifically was academic references. And I found that one thing that really helped me when I was looking for those references was approaching professors that I interacted with a lot in class. So I think one thing that can really help is to be interactive in your classes, to take part in conversations and discuss. Because when you do that, I think in my experience, my professors took note of that, and I think that really helped me be able to find good, solid academic references specifically. So for those of you who are entering into your undergraduate years or are still in your undergraduate years, that might be something to think about, is how your participation in class, contributing to the discussion, that sort of thing. Something that will have your profs, help your profs remember just who you are.
I think it is. You're maybe at a disadvantage now if you're taking your courses online and you're in third or fourth year trying to get to know your professors. I think that's tough. It seems to me, and I'm not sure exactly how the online courses are working, but it seems to me that quite a few of them, you've got the participation aspect. You're online, you've got the video, you can participate. If so, I would encourage you to do so and be one of those people that's not just kind of sitting in the background on mute, snacking the whole time, although that would probably be me. I think that, in any way you can participate. Otherwise, sometimes it's difficult, but sometimes you can just reach out to your professor and you can say, I read this paper that you wrote and I thought that it was really interesting. I wonder if you have time for a phone call about it sometime, or I wonder if you could provide me with your thoughts on this or that. And again, I know that's a tough thing to do, but sometimes you just got to do the tough thing in the short term so that you can get what you want in the long run. And I think that those relationships as well, you'll be surprised. People are often interested in those interactions more than you would expect. And you could end up developing relationships that end up being important to you besides just getting your letter of recommendation. Your professors are often interesting people. They're intelligent people. They've had very different experiences. And so it can be a nice thing to do. Cassandra?
If I can just add to that quickly, Jacqueline, I think because we all realize that that's a goal and it's attainable, you want to be authentic and genuine in those relationships. I think a lot of times people just go after it just knowing that they need that recommendation letter. So if you can, if it's a class that you're actually quite interested in, or as Jacqueline had mentioned, if it was a paper that you were genuinely interested in, because I think your professors, they're intelligent people, so they can read through some of that. So I think it's quite important, just to reiterate, being authentic, being genuine, making a point, because people will remember that. If you ask those questions and they're thinking, oh, well, that's interesting that was their perspective, or this is, they're participating because they actually genuinely want to know, rather than, okay, there's an end goal, I need this letter, how am I going to get this letter, sort of thing.
Absolutely, and I think you're right. I think that can be fairly transparent, and it makes the whole situation more awkward for both of you. I think that if you can find common ground, or even if you've written a paper and you approach them and you say, I really like your feedback, I'm not asking you to change my grade, I'm just looking to see how I could have done better or what your thoughts are. I think that a conversation that you're genuinely comfortable in, they'll be able to read that and they'll be happy to be having that conversation oftentimes. Christine and Cassandra specifically, we've got some questions about the difficulty of transitioning from being abroad to being here, how difficult it was to get a job here, to come back and do that transition. If you have any input on that.
Sure, I'll go ahead. So I was a little bit nervous, I didn't know what to expect. And I wasn't really thinking too much about the transition back. I thought, maybe I'll stay in the UK at one point and try out sort of doing their version of articling over there and see what comes of it. But, you know, as it turned out, it actually wasn't a terrible transition. So like we mentioned, the NCA exams that you need to take, they're, you know, pretty straightforward, open book, pass or fail. They're kind of, you know, study at your own leisure. You can, you know, schedule when you actually sit the exams. You can take, you know, all 5 of them at once if you're assessed for 5, or you can split them up into however many that are manageable to you. And again, they're open book. There's a lot of tutors now that are tutoring these exams specifically, and some notes and things like that that you can get your hands on. So yeah, the transition wasn't difficult at all. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by how recognized a international law degree is here in Canada. None of the firms that I applied to had any qualms or issues with my degree, thinking it was any lesser or anything like that. And the more that I've, you know, experienced the legal field and met different lawyers, it's actually surprising how many people have gone abroad or are going abroad. So I think it's only going to become more common way of obtaining a law degree. And yeah, definitely something that's very achievable.
Absolutely, it is a common thing. I know quite a few people, and a lot of lawyers practicing in Barrie did get their degrees abroad. So I think that it's a really realistic option. Cassandra, did you have anything to add? Also, people are asking about whether it made the bar exams any more difficult, if either of you want to comment on that.
Sure. I guess coming back, it just depends, I think, on your perspective, your previous experiences as well. So I had worked at a firm for 2 years before I left for law school. So I had built some relationships that way. So I think if you're coming in blind and then maybe trying to go to a top tier firm downtown Toronto, you know, I don't take this for a fact. I'm not quite sure what their perspective is. I think if you're coming into a firm that has practicing lawyers that did go abroad, I think you just have a different perspective, right? You know, whether you want to look at it as being resilient because you moved to a different country by yourself, you didn't know anybody, there's skills there that you can apply to postgraduate lifestyle. And I'm thinking with the exams, I think I had mentioned this already, the NCAs, there were a couple that were relevant. I just actually wrote the barrister exam this past weekend. So I think 3 of the exams were precursors, essentially. There was definitely additional information and material to study for the bar, but it was a good foundation for sure. I think one thing that I really learned, and maybe this is hindsight as well, law school to me was more about learning certain tools, because you're not essentially, or I mean, maybe it's just not my memory, but you don't remember absolutely everything from every class, first year to third year. So to me, it's about learning tools that you can then transition into your work life that are applicable. Because I'm not sure if Jacqueline had mentioned this, but in law school, I was dead set on family law. I can't say that that's the way that I'm going. So, and with having a commerce undergrad, I didn't enjoy corporate law at school, and now in practice, I'm really quite enjoying it. So it's really interesting. I think it's very important to have an open mind. I think that, and to be able to be swayed too, because that's quite important. And I'm trying to think of, yeah, I think the transition home, you know, it does seem to be fairly steep, but I think once you're here, you know, it's just another few exams. So it's not anything that's unusual for you. It's just, you know, a few months extra. So I wouldn't suspect that it would be a barrier to entry by any means.
It sounds like the NCA exams are really helpful in kind of smoothing the transition, so that anything that, you know, may have been a little bit different about studying abroad, you've kind of got that information gap filled by those exams, which is nice.
For sure, yeah.
Just to answer a couple more questions, somebody had asked whether it's necessary or helpful for your law school applications to do a thesis in your final year of undergrad. Again, I can't speak for the law schools, but I didn't do a thesis in my final year of undergrad, and it didn't affect any of my applications. I haven't heard that it does. It might be helpful in the sense that you've conducted that research and you've prepared, you know, a rigorous academic paper. But aside from that, I don't think that it's, from my experience, it hasn't been a necessity. And I don't know if any of you have found differently.
I think it's something that's considered, but I certainly don't think it's determinative. I do a thesis myself either. I don't actually know anybody. No, none of my friends I don't think at law school actually did either. So I think it's something that they consider, but it's certainly not determinative as far as I know.
I think sometimes people associate a thesis with an honors Bachelor of Arts or a four-year Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of, I don't really know how it works with Bachelor of Science, to be honest, but as compared with a three-year degree. And if that is something that you were thinking of, I know that from what I've heard, it's much more difficult to get in after 3 years than it is after 4, but it's not impossible. It does happen. I think that fewer students are accepted after 3 years as compared with 4. Someone also asked about the type of well-roundedness that law schools look at. Said aside from volunteering for law firms or within law societies, will law schools also look at your involvement in other undergrad clubs, NGOs, sports, or teams? My experience has been yes. Everything on the forums has said yes. Again, they really do like someone who is well-rounded in all aspects. So if you were, I've heard really good things about someone who was captain of the Frisbee team at her undergraduate university, or someone who is really successful athletically or involved in, it doesn't have to be related to law at all, from my understanding. They just like to see that you haven't just spent your whole life gunning for good grades, trying to get into law school without paying attention to anything else. So I think that other experience is good as well. Okay, we also had a question, just because I see that we're running out of time, and I think it's important to get to the questions, although we had other topics to maybe discuss. Someone had left for work but said he'll tune in later to the recorded version, which I think is great. Thanks for letting us know. His question is, what advantages do you feel you gain from doing law school internationally? He's in his 4th year at Carleton, so he's unsure of whether or not he wants to pursue law school in Canada, France, UK, or Australia. So I know that we did touch on that a little bit. Are there advantages that you felt that you gained? I know you talked a little bit about the timing and how you can finish in 2 years, and then you can be doing your NCAs here kind of while you're working. I know a lot of people do, which is a nice aspect of it. Are there other advantages that either of you found?
I would say that, timing is a big advantage as well if you're able to come back and, crunch your NCA exams into less than 1 year. So, if you are a more mature student or something like that, it does take sort of an extra year off if you do choose to go to an international school and do a 2-year law degree. Some of the other advantages I would say is just, from a personal perspective as well, just, being more cultured and well-rounded, meeting new people and just gaining, independence from going abroad. In terms of the actual academics, I believe someone asked a question, coming from your undergrad, were you prepared to go to, law school abroad? In the UK anyways, a lot of the students in my classes, they were coming out of high school. So you actually don't need to do an undergrad degree. So there's obviously a different sort of maturity and academic level there. So I definitely feel like a lot of the Canadian law students in the UK sort of had a one-up, and that a lot of it was, fairly straightforward for us in terms of the material. And it's just impressive how, in the UK, students can go right out of high school into law school, which I certainly think I would struggle with, but a lot of them were able to do, pretty well. So I don't think that's an issue, and that's potentially an advantage that you would have going abroad, is that compared to your other classmates, you may have already, 4 years of academics over those individuals and who you're being graded against, etc. So.
Cassandra, anything to add to that?
I think that that's really covered the advantages for sure. Christine's given some good insight on it. I just wanted to go back to the importance of being well-rounded. I think even from getting accepted into law school perspective, things like sports, volunteering, extracurriculars, whether it's, you're involved in the school itself. Also, while you're at law school, I think it goes by really, really fast, and it's an extremely competitive environment. So I think it's important to keep things into perspective as well, and pursue maybe hobbies or other things while you're there, because I mean, from a hiring perspective, I'm not quite sure what that benchmark is. Say it's an arbitrary number such as 75. You know, once you get that number, the employer is really going to be interested in who you are as a person. So what makes you different? Are you a good fit for their firm? I know for me, I'm really into golf, and that seems to be something that is interesting from a law firm perspective. So
Big hit.
Yeah, so I played on Bond University's team, and I played in the university games. So that was a great experience. I think that there's things that can add to yourself as value that are beyond just the degree itself. And I think recognizing that at the end of the day, we all have the same degree, and whether or not you have that grade is quite important. However, you need to also go above and beyond that. So I think it's important to just make sure you have some perspective that yes, it is important. It's very competitive. Getting those top grades is great, but then realizing that real life is quite a bit different. You have all, you know, a myriad of things going on. So it's not just, oh, okay, I can just go to school and study. Well, you know, you have a family, or you have, you know, certain hobbies and things outside of work that are going to take your attention away from that as well. And can you juggle those things? So I think if you're showing your future employer that you're involved in multiple things outside of law school while still attaining some benchmark, I think you'll be quite competitive.
Absolutely. And that's the well-roundedness comes into effect even after you've gotten into law school. And unfortunately, to get in, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, there's no interview to get into law school, or at least not any of the schools that I applied to. But when it comes to being hired, it is still very competitive. And so it's difficult to stand out from the crowd when, as Cassandra said, you know, maybe you've got the benchmark of 75 and 3 of you have that 75. So you want to show up to an interview and be able to make conversation or have something in common with somebody, anything that's going to set you apart. So interview skills are very important as well as you get further into the game. And especially I know in Toronto, the OCI process, I can't even remember now what it stands for, which is kind of blissful. On campus interviews, maybe, the process of being hired from your law school, you know, they'll come and they'll recruit from Toronto firms or from other firms. And it's very, very competitive, but I have friends that went through the process, and they went through series of interviews, and it would just be interview after interview. And a lot of it was about their legal knowledge, but a lot of it was also about who they were. And so it's nice to have something that you can talk about in situations like that. I see there are a couple questions about the LSATs here. We really did want to get into a whole discussion about LSATs and what it's like to practice as a lawyer, the bar exams. We're running out of time. We might, I don't know if we'll have to do something like this again, but just to quickly answer the LSAT questions, someone had asked how difficult they are and how soon they should start preparing for them, what we did to prepare for them, whether you did a prep course or self-study. I don't think Cassandra did the LSAT. I don't know whether you did, Christine, because as you mentioned, it's not necessary to go over it. You did do the LSAT?
Yes, I did do the LSAT. Trying to remember now.
It was a while ago. Alex, you would have probably written it more recently than Christine and I.
Yeah, I wrote it. I believe it was I think it was last January of 2019 is when I wrote it. And yeah, it's a really interesting test. I guess my main point on the LSAT is don't put it off to the end, because it really is a significant portion of your application if you're thinking about going to law school. And I know a lot of people who kind of didn't really give it enough attention. That really sort of bit them when it actually came down to it. That said, it's sort of it's not like a conventional knowledge test, so it's different for different people. Like one person might be able to not have to do as much study as another. So the bulk of what I have to say is don't put it off to the end. I think it's something that is worth seriously thinking about and putting time aside to studying for sure.
I couldn't agree more. I wrote the LSAT, I think 5 years ago. I wrote it while I was, maybe 6 years ago. I wrote it while I was in my 3rd year of undergrad, just because you can write it, I think, up to 3 times. Different schools look at that differently. Some of them will average your score. Some of them only take your highest score. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's something that's discussed pretty heavily on the forums as well. But I wanted to take it early just in case I wanted to retake it if I wasn't happy with my score. I did take a prep course, and I've recommended it to everybody that will listen. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was really well done. I did mine over the weekend. So it was Friday evening, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And then they administered a couple of practice exams the Sunday, and then a couple of Wednesdays subsequent to that, I think. And then you also got a prep course or a practice test book, which had a few tests in it. So what I did was, I think I took about a month, and every week I would study and I would go through practice questions. And then at the end of the week, I would run through practice tests. I would simulate the environment. So I would sit there and set out the 25-minute blocks. I would, only let myself take a break in the middle of it all. I tried to make it as similar to the actual test environment as possible. And then the last week I did a few different tests. I think that the practice test and simulating the environment was very helpful. I think the course was really helpful. There are some logic questions where you're trying to rearrange your thinking and you're trying to put things in order. And those were really difficult to work through. But once someone had explained it in a practice test, I found I had a system and it was great. Someone asked what prep course I did. I took the Oxford Seminars prep course. I liked that one. It was really well done. I took it in Toronto. And they offered, I don't know if they still offer now, but you could take the program a second time within a year. So I took the exam shortly after I took the course, and then I figured if I wasn't happy, I could take the course again for free within the year and then retake the test. So it's a tough test given the situation and the environment. A lot of people say they end up scoring more poorly on their final test than they do on the practices just because they're less comfortable. I ended up scoring a little bit better. I think I just got lucky with the questions that they gave me, and that's kind of the luck of the draw. But I think that simulating the environment really helped me to not get as nervous once I got there. I also figured out how to manipulate caffeine. Cassandra and I were talking today about how neither of us drank coffee before law school. But for the LSAT, I found that in one of the reading comprehension sections, I would get very sleepy every time I got through it, and I just couldn't focus. So I learned, okay, if I take, if I have a coffee beforehand, or if I didn't want a full coffee because I didn't want to have to be running to the bathroom, I would take like an espresso shot. Not that I'm condoning that. I don't know what kind of conditions it was, but that was my system. So I think figure something out that's going to keep you awake, or that's going to keep you focused while you're doing the LSAT prep. Someone asked whether I did the prep course while I was still in school or over the summer. I did it over the summer. So I did it in May, and then I wrote the June exam. I was working full time, so I think I probably could have done it. I could have done it while I was in school. I wouldn't recommend it, just because working academically and working as a server were completely different things. I found that at the end of the day, after being a server, it was exhausting, but I could focus on the academics. Whereas I find when I've got academic things on my plate, it's hard to stop those and say, okay, I've done enough, and move on to something else. I only took it once. I don't know about Alex and Christine. Somebody asked how many times we took the test.
I only took it once as well. And of note too, something I'll just add in, I actually didn't take a LSAT prep course myself. I did self-study. I just did a lot of, you can buy LSAT test books, kind of like Jacqueline was mentioning, they're available, and I found them really helpful. And there are also some really great resources as far as just LSAT study books. I used a set of books from PowerScore, I believe it was. But yeah, I only took the test once.
Yeah, I also took the test once, and I did do a prep course, and I believe it was through Kaplan at McMaster University in Hamilton. I believe is where the course was held at the time. And I definitely found it very helpful. So I would highly recommend doing a prep course. And I believe, like Jacqueline mentioned, they did give some, practice exams and a booklet sort of. So I remembered, studying off of that at home, and yeah, I found that definitely helpful in terms of getting prepared, and timing, of course, is key. So if you can, sort of practice your timing when you're doing your practice test, that's very helpful for sure.
We should note that we were all fortunate to only have written it once, but I know a lot of people that I went to law school with that wrote it a few times, or, that scored lower and had good grades to balance it out, and they were great. I know a lot of people that did really, really well in law school. They're doing really well in practice now. They're great lawyers. They're really intelligent, and they really struggled with the LSAT. And so they took it a few times, or they scored low and just tried to get into law school anyways, and it worked. So someone's asking how much it caught, or how much the score impacted our acceptances. Unfortunately, we can't say. We really don't know. Again, if you go on the forums, people speculate about the weight that each school puts on the LSAT as compared with your grades, as compared with extracurriculars. I couldn't even begin to say. But I know that at Osgood, there was a wide variation of LSAT scores. I know people that, I think I knew someone that scored a 158, and then I obviously knew people that scored, into the 170s, and all of them did really well in school. So I think try not to be discouraged if you are struggling a little bit with the LSAT. I think someone asked how many times you can retake it. I think you can take it up to 3 times within a certain period of time. And again, I would look to the forums or call your law schools that you're applying to just to see what the impact is of retaking the test. But I think it's a really tough thing, and it dissuades a lot of people from applying, but I think it's worth trying out. Someone asked how long they should prepare before taking it. Like I said, I did a month. I don't know how long everybody else spent it. I think that even more than a month, if you've got the time, is great. It wasn't my full-time job while I was studying for it. I would definitely touch on it every day for a couple of hours, and then I would spend a full weekend day doing the practice tests. I was definitely dedicated to it. I know people that, I know someone that prepared for 3 or 4 months and didn't do well on the LSAT. Like it's hard to quantify things like that. I would just say do the practice exams and figure out how to get your mind around the practice questions as best you can. Sorry, I see that we're 6 minutes past our time now. I'm glad that there have been so many questions and that this has been such an active discussion. Like I said, we were going to get more into the LSAT discussion. I think we covered quite a bit of it. The bar exams are to be practice. If there's enough interest, then maybe we resume at some point and we discuss those things. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to us. If you head to the Barriston website, first of all, if you're interested in ever being a student with Barriston, or if you're further along in the process, if you're interested in a career with Barriston, check out our careers page on the website, which is barristonlaw.com. Also on that website is a lawyers page, and it's got our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions. We're happy to help you figure out the process. Again, we don't always have all the answers, and we don't know what it is that law schools are looking for. All we can do is speculate, but having been through the process, we might be able to give you a little bit of insight that you might find helpful. So thank you all for coming out. Best of luck in whatever stage of the process you're in and in your future endeavors.